for Health and Social Care if you will make a statement on the publication of his department's plan for elective care recovery in England.
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the COVID-19 pandemic has had a huge impact on healthcare systems everywhere. The NHS has performed incredibly, caring for COVID and non-COVID patients alike and delivering the vaccination programme that's helped us to open up this country once again. Throughout the pandemic, we had to take steps to make sure we could treat those with the greatest clinical need and make sure that we provided a safe for those who needed COVID care. As a result, there is undeniably a huge COVID backlog that needs urgent attention. The number of people waiting for care in England now stands at around 6 million, and we know that this figure will get worse before it gets better. Not only that, our best current estimate is that around 8.5 million people haven't come forward for treatment during the pandemic who normally would do. But we are pulling out all the stops to help the NHS recover and make sure patients are receiving the right care at the right time. Honourable members will be aware that the government has invested over £8 billion in the NHS in the 3 years from 2022-23 to 24-25. And as part of the new Health and Social Care levy, we will be putting huge levels of investment into health and social care over the coming 3 years. All the time, we're announcing new solutions for how we can make sure the NHS is on the firmest footing for the future. On Friday, we launched a call for evidence that will inform an ambitious new vision for how we lead the world in cancer care. As the Prime Minister announced earlier today, we are setting out some tough targets for the NHS on cancer. We want to ensure that 75% of patients are diagnosed or have cancer ruled out within 28 days of a GP referral, and to get the backlog of people waiting more than 2 months for their cancer treatment by March 2023 to pre-pandemic levels. Today, the NHS has also announced the launch of a new platform, My Planned Care, which will provide patients and their carers with relevant and up-to-date information ahead of planned treatment. This includes information on waiting times for their provider. Mr. Speaker, I am under no illusions that our health system is facing an enormous and unprecedented challenge. That is why we are doing everything in our power to support the NHS and its patients, recovering services, to reduce waiting times and deliver more checks, operations and treatments. We are faced with a once-in-a-generation challenge. We know we must get this right. We are working with the NHS and across government to deliver a targeted and far-reaching plan for elective recovery, and we will be updating the House at the earliest possible opportunity.
Wes Streeting.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This isn't a COVID backlog, this is a Tory backlog. We went into the pandemic with NHS waiting lists already at a record 4.5 million, and now 6 million people are waiting on NHS waiting lists, more than ever before. More than 1 million are waiting for scans and tests used to diagnose cancer. And the NHS itself is waiting for the government's plan to deal with the backlog. So where is it? It was due to be published today, but was pulled last night. It's like something from the thick of it, but the reality is worse than fiction. A photo op without a plan. Their own NHS recovery plan, just another cancelled operation. But don't worry, Mr. Speaker, because there's a website coming that will tell people they're waiting a long time, even if there's no plan to make sure that they don't. And then there's the reason for the delay. Briefings for the Department for Health and Social Care claimed the Chancellor blocked the plan because, to quote one government official, it's pretty obvious it's about Treasury reluctance to rescue the Prime Minister. Is this where the shambles of the Conservative Party have taken us? The Chancellor, is he seriously playing political games while 6 million people wait for care? No wonder the Health Secretary hasn't bothered to show his face this afternoon. He's probably still recovering from the embarrassment of this morning's media round, where the big announcement was, literally, there is an announcement. So it's been left to the Prime Minister to clear things up, which tends to go almost as well as breakfast television with the Culture Secretary. No wonder she's been dispatched to the Middle East. But on to those tough targets the Minister mentioned. Today, the Prime Minister announced a new target that no one should wait more than 2 months for cancer diagnosis. But there was already a target for the vast majority of cancer patients to be treated within 2 months of referral, and it hasn't been hit since 2015. Isn't this just another example of the Conservatives lowering standards for patients because they consistently fail to meet them? The Prime Minister has also announced that 3 out of 4 patients should receive a cancer diagnosis within 28 days. But this is an existing target that was introduced last April and has never been met. So, Mr. Speaker, the waiting list crisis is the chickens coming home to roost after more than a decade of Tory failure. The Treasury blocked a plan for staffing, and now they're blocking the plan to cut waiting time. So isn't it now clear, amidst the chaos, confusion and spectacular incompetence on display, that the longer we give the Conservatives in government, the longer patients will wait?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to the Shadow Secretary of State. As he alluded to, 2 million of those on the waiting list have entered that waiting list since the pandemic began. There is undoubtedly a huge COVID backlog, as we had to put in place infection prevention and control measures, as we had to make sure there was availability of beds for those with COVID. And I am with him, I suspect, on at least one point, which is I, like him, entirely understand the impact that has on people's lives, their anxiety and their health outcomes. And that's why this government is determined to tackle that waiting list. As I said in my opening remarks, this is a once-in-a-generation challenge, and it's absolutely right that we make sure we get this plan right. We need to make sure we have the right plan, delivering the right outcomes. He mentioned delays. I have to say, this plan is delayed. This is a plan we anticipated publishing in December. The reason we didn't is because of the Omicron variant and the impact that has had over the winter period on our health services. And we have made sure that we get it right with this plan. He mentioned Her Majesty's Treasury. And I have to say, Mr. Speaker, speaking as a Minister in the Department of Health and Social Care, we couldn't wish for a better partner than Her Majesty's Treasury or this Chancellor, who have shown strong support to our care system throughout this pandemic, with record levels of funding to help support it through the pandemic and to help recover performance subsequently. And I have to say, this government had already, even before the pandemic, put in place, under the now Secretary of State for Health when he was Chancellor, 33.9 billion increase in funding, enshrined in law, one of the first pieces of legislation passed by this government after the election. And we've set out our long-term funding plans through the Health and Care Levy, which, if I recall, his party didn't support.
Mr.
Speaker, we're grateful to the opposition spokesman for his sub-leadership bid in raising this important topic. Can I say to the Minister that today was not a constituent wrote saying she had nothing but praise for the hospital treatment she was getting. Can I pass on my thought, which is instead of using the word elective, we should use the word planned care, as he did in his statement? And can I also, through him, remind the House that 2 years into the last Labour government, there was an edict saying no hospital could do elective care, planned care, until it was 2 years past the time that people were booked. Things are much better now, and most of us are grateful.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm grateful to the Father of the House, and he once again brings his typical wisdom and experience in this House to our deliberations today, and the final point that he makes. And he's absolutely right. I'm certainly happy to join with him and his constituents in expressing gratitude to all those who work in the NHS for the work they have been doing throughout this pandemic, but that they do every day, irrespective of the pandemic. And I know, again, that is something I know that both sides of this House would share in. And he makes an important point. The term electives is a technical term used within the NHS, but I take his point that often it's very easy for us all in this House to talk in the technical terms used within our departments or within a system. It's often more helpful if we talk in terms that mean something to all of our constituents, rather more simply.
Keeley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a survivor of breast cancer, which was treated in 2019, I was so grateful to be seen within 10 days of referral by my GP and to start treatment within a month. It is frightening that in the months between April and November last year, over 90,000 women who may have breast cancer were not seen by a specialist within a target of 14 days of being urgently referred by a GP, and that this year, 500,000 people with suspected cancer will wait longer than the supposed 2-week maximum to see an oncologist. The Minister will know that an early diagnosis can be life-saving. What does he think the impact will be to potential cancer patients of a delay to the NHS recovery plan when waiting times are spiralling so much?
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady, and she and I often exchange views across this dispatch box, and she always asks sensible and reasonable questions. And she's right to highlight the importance of cancer care. She's also right to highlight that there are some illnesses, some diseases like cancer, where delay can significantly detrimentally impact on the outcomes experienced by those patients. Between March 2020 and November 2021, over 4 million urgent referrals were made for cancer, with over 960,000 people receiving cancer treatment. And thanks to the amazing work of NHS staff, we maintained cancer treatment at 99.7% of pre-pandemic levels for the latest month for which I have statistics, which is November of last year. So what I would say to her, that as well as looking to the future with the announcement of community diagnostics hubs, a whole range of other measures, the plan is not necessary for us to be doing the work we are already doing. The plan is important for mapping out the future direction and future care, but we're not waiting for a plan to be improving services and building back better to tackle those waiting lists.
John Redmond.
If it wasn't the Treasury holding the plan up, can we be told what was and when will we get the plan?
Well, I'm grateful to my right honourable friend, I think, for his question. As I've set out to the House, it's important that this plan is the right one and does the job it is intended for. We are working closely with other government departments to make sure that the plan, when it is published, does the job it is intended for, and I look forward to the publication of that plan imminently.
Mr. Speaker, it's absolutely essential that we address cancer treatment capacity. The Minister talks about diagnostics, that's important, but it's a horse and cart, it's hand and glove. And I know this Minister is aware of the enormous unharnessed potential of high-tech radiotherapy as a solution to time-critical cancer backlogs. But still, it only receives 5% of the cancer budget. But increasingly, this investment could take enormous pressure off the NHS, especially at this time. So will he arrange for a meeting with the Secretary of State so that we can explain to him just what the important role advanced radiotherapy could play in tackling the cancer backlog?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman, and he and I have met previously and discussed this issue, and I share his view about the value of radiotherapy in helping tackle the cancer backlog, but also more broadly as a treatment. I and ministers are always happy to meet with him.
Dr. Caroline Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend spoke earlier of the record levels of investment this government has made in the NHS. But each of those patients waiting for cancer treatment is undergoing a very long and frightening experience as they wait longer than they need to. So as I ask my honourable friend, as he focuses on reducing this backlog, how does he ensure record levels of investment is focused directly only on measures that will reduce the backlog and is not wasted?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend who knows of what she speaks as a serving consultant in our NHS. She's absolutely right. Investment is important, but it's the outcomes that really matter. And we are determined through the measures we've already, for example, set out around the community diagnostic hubs, bringing that diagnostic capacity to local communities and making it more. One example of how we're going to make sure that that money delivers the outcomes required.
Sajid Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Health conditions don't wait until a medic or a bed is available. Health conditions deteriorate, often very quickly, and every single one of the 6 million people on that waiting list are going to have to rely on their GPs for extra appointments, extra treatments, and possibly to deal with very severe complications. So what support will there be for primary care whilst all these people are waiting for their planned secondary care?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the Honourable Lady makes a very important point, actually, and I'll take the opportunity to put on record in response to it my gratitude to all those in general practice for the amazing work they have been doing over the past 2 years, and again, as they always do. They are the front door to the NHS for patients and for all of our constituents. We already set out last year the additional funding being made available for general practice to help recover from the changes that had to be made during the pandemic. But we continue to look at the system as a whole, not in its component parts, because she's absolutely right. General practice and general practitioners are the people that often our constituents will go to if their operation is delayed or if they need additional care whilst waiting for an operation. So it's important we provide the support to general practice as well.
Dr. Jim Wallace.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Considering that health service waiting lists are higher in Labour-controlled Wales, and that my Bridgend constituents are being told they're going to have to wait until at least the 25th of March to find out what Labour's plan is in Wales, does my honourable friend agree with me that much of what the opposition have said here today would be better directed down the M4 towards their Welsh Labour colleagues?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend who puts his finger on an extremely important point. I think 1 in 5 in Wales are on a waiting list. And while this government has not only put in place measures already to help bring down waiting lists, with that plan due to be published imminently, we're still waiting to see what the Welsh Government intends to do or whether it even has a plan.
Chris Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just on the issue of cancer, can I urge the government to abandon this talk of a war on cancer? It was Richard Nixon's term, and it was thought to be outdated back then. And to many people, when ministers talking cancer and how somebody's been particularly plucky or courageous fighting cancer, it just feels as if you're sort of telling off the people who don't survive for not having been courageous enough. And I know that's not what anybody means. So can we completely change that language? Can you just clarify for us? As I understand it, the Prime Minister has also announced another cancer target today, which is that we're to get to 75% of all cancer diagnoses to be made at stage 1 or stage 2. I just wonder how on earth he's intending to get to that.
Minister.
To the right honourable gentleman for his remarks, and he speaks often on this topic from experience in this House, and it's right that we listen very carefully to him. I take his point about the importance of language and how different terms, different approaches to it will be interpreted by people who are undergoing treatment or diagnosis for cancer, and I take that, I think, in the spirit in which he meant that observation. In respect of the Prime Minister's target, the Prime Minister is unapologetically ambitious in seeking to tackle waiting lists and improve performance of cancer care, and that is why we are investing record levels in our NHS, why we're bringing forward new diagnostic hubs, and why he will see when this plan is published imminently. I think, coupled with the plan the Secretary of State set out on Friday, he will see when this plan is published imminently, I think, measures in it which will help reassure him on this. But I'm always...
Mitchell.
My honourable friend is surely absolutely right to, first of all, prioritise this vital catch-up programme for our constituents, but secondly, to ensure that we deliver real value for money. At a time of high taxation overall, my constituents want to ensure that for every pound of hard-earned taxpayers' money that is spent on this vital programme, they are really getting 100 pence of value as a result in delivery. And I assume it is for that very reason that this programme is slightly delayed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the reason this plan is delayed is, as I alluded to, the Omicron variant and the impact that had on our NHS. But my right honourable friend makes a very important point, both about us prioritising tackling waiting lists and tackling waiting times. But he's absolutely right. This is a once-in-a-generation challenge, and it's right that we get the right answer, the right outcomes for patients, and also the right outcomes for taxpayers. And that's what we will do with this plan.
John Watt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. These waiting times are misery and pain and frustration and agony for my constituents, plus the mental anguish of not knowing what is happening or what is going to happen. I have constituents who are begging and borrowing the money to go private because they cannot stand the pain. Is that his plan for the NHS, driving people into the private sector? And if it isn't, what is his plan?
To the honourable lady, she's right in some of what she says, which is the impact that a wait for treatment can have on those we can all appreciate, both in terms of their health outcomes, but also, she quite rightly alludes to mental health, the challenges for people's mental health as they worry about their diagnosis or about when they're going to receive the treatment. And that doesn't just apply to those who are diagnosed with a life-threatening condition, but also those who have a life-limiting condition or need, for example, orthopedic surgery or eye surgery or similar, where it impacts on their quality of life, their ability to work and similar. So I think she makes an important point there. As I've set out to the House, we've already made significant strides as we've come out of this pandemic in setting out through the Community Diagnostics Hub, through our approach to surgical hubs, how we can rapidly ramp up the number of planned surgeries undertaken. But we do also have to, I think, be honest with people that that list will get worse before it gets better, because people who haven't come forward will come forward. And equally, the golden thread that runs through this is our NHS workforce, and we have to recognise the same people who are going to be tackling this waiting list are also the people who are working flat out through the pandemic. So we've also got to make sure we give them the space and the support to recover physically and emotionally.
Member Croft.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank my honourable friend for his work on this? He will know that in order to tackle these waiting lists, our NHS staff need the very best buildings and the very best equipment. We've seen some fantastic investment in Scunthorpe Hospital, but will he now meet with me to discuss our plans for a longer term investment and upgrade to Scunthorpe Hospital?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend. She is a champion for Scunthorpe Hospital in this House, and since her election has never ceased to politely but firmly lobby on its behalf, and I'm of course delighted to agree to meet with her.
Clive Baffin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If we're going to deal with this backlog, then we need to deal with vacancies within the NHS. That means we don't have time to wait for training doctors and nurses. We need qualified staff now. So can the Minister say, where is he going to get those staff from now? Is he looking abroad, or where is he going to find them?
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman. He does make a very sensible and serious point, which I alluded to earlier, which is it's the workforce. Buildings are fantastic, technology is fantastic, but it's the people who operate them that really make the difference. And I can offer him the reassurance that we are already well on target to meeting our 50,000 nurses pledge from the manifesto in 2019. We have seen, compared to last year, October 21 compared to October 20, thousands more doctors, thousands more nurses in our NHS. So we do continue to grow that workforce from a whole range of sources, including the additional medical school places that this government delivered a few years ago.
Steve Brown.
There's no question that this is impacting the quality of life for my constituents, but I fail to see how taking £36 billion out of the system would help. Can I ask my honourable friend, though, to look further upstream of right now and ask him how the very welcome 10-year cancer plan announced on Friday will improve our health and prevent more complex interventions in the future? And could he just confirm to me that the 28-day cancer standard, which does sound familiar, and I left office 3 years ago next month, is a maximum, not a target? In other words, we always want to do much, much better, because we know the quicker it's caught, the better the outcome.
Mr. Speaker, well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and he's touching on the 10-year cancer plan. Absolutely right in the point underlying what he says, which is that the earlier the diagnosis, the better the outcomes as a rule in cancer treatment. And yes, we set targets, but we always hope to exceed them. It has been incredibly challenging to do that over recent years, and that's why we, as a government, are investing not only the resources in this, but the reform, putting in place the reforms that are needed to achieve these targets.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to start by thanking all the NHS caseworkers who've done a tremendous job throughout this pandemic. My mum's been waiting for a shoulder replacement surgery for over 2 years. The delay in this plan will mean that she will live with excruciating pain. So can the Minister give assurances that this backlog will be dealt with in a timely fashion and will be adequately resourced and have the funding necessary to deal with it? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm grateful to the honourable lady. And as I said earlier, I join with her in those thanks and in the gratitude towards all those working within the NHS. I can reassure her, and I'm sure every member of this House will receive correspondence from constituents in the position she outlined, and understandably they will be distressed and often in pain What I would say to her is that this plan is not a necessary precursor for work to be done, which is already underway, to bring that waiting list down and get it under control. As I've alluded to already, not only is there record investment in resources going into it, but on this side of the House, while we focus to a degree on that, we also focus on what that money, that taxpayers' money, does in delivering outcomes for people. Hence why we've already announced the community diagnostic hubs. We've set out plans for surgical hubs. And I should just say very briefly, we're very grateful to all of the charities and campaigning organisations who have, over recent months, engaged to help advise on interventions that they think can make a genuine difference to waiting lists, but also to keeping patients informed and supported while they do wait.
So, Julian Lowe.
Speaker, how much greater would the backlog be if we had not successfully resisted the entreaties of those modelers and indeed politicians who wanted another shutdown over the Christmas period?
Well, I'm grateful to my right honourable friend. It's always hard to prove a counterfactual, as he will know, but we do know that the measures we took during the course of the pandemic in earlier waves, necessary measures to help tackle this dangerous virus, have inevitably had a significant impact on waiting lists due to infection prevention and control measures, a whole range of other things. Normal levels of surgery and planned surgery were not able to go ahead. So he may be able to extrapolate from that, but I'd say it's slightly difficult to come up with a detailed counterfactual.
Thank
you very much, Mr. Speaker. My mother died prematurely of lung cancer in her early 60s. So I know, as many of us in this House do, that when it comes to cancer, waiting times don't just inconvenience, they literally mean the difference between life and death. I agree with what the Minister said a minute ago, that it's not just about investment, it's about outcomes, and it's purely on outcomes that this government is failing. Would he agree with me that these briefings from his own department that suggesting the political games at the top of the Conservative Party, the who's up, the who's down, who's going to be the leader next, are actually influencing and impacting on the government's ability to get this plan out, and that is will not be forgiven by those people who are waiting for cancer treatment right now?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for his willingness to share with the House his personal experience in respect of his mother. And I think in sharing that, he probably speaks for a number of members of this House, and certainly a number of our constituents. He said it's important that we focus on cancer. He's absolutely right. There are, and clinical prioritisation will be a key part of how we address bringing the waiting list down, because it's right that we focus on those illnesses, those diseases where the longer the delay, the greater the risk of not making a full recovery or of a negative outcome. So he's right to highlight cancer as on certain other key areas. To his final point, I have to say, I don't share that view. I believe that it's right that we get this plan right, that it delivers the outcomes we need. And as I've said to a number of honourable and right honourable members, I don't believe that this plan itself is a necessary precursor for getting on with already taking a number of steps, as we've done as a government, to start bringing those waiting lists down.
Policy.
Speaker, will the Minister agree that there really must be an important role in this programme for smaller hospitals such as St Cross in Rugby, where on a recent visit I saw some brand new operating theatres providing important extra local capacity?
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and I'm grateful to him for his shout out for his local hospital. He's absolutely right. We need to, and this is the approach we're adopting, we need to utilise the resources and the capacity of the whole system. Often the debate can focus on the large acute district general hospitals, but he's absolutely right. Smaller hospitals, community hospitals, and indeed community facilities all have a part to play in helping tackle this waiting list.
On the hand.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Long delays in diagnosis and inappropriate and sometimes outdated treatment are typical for those living with the condition ME. As the chair of the APPG on ME, I was pleased to see the new NICE guidelines on the treatment of the condition. Can the Minister detail what steps have been taken to implement this and to ensure speedy diagnosis and appropriate treatment?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm grateful to the honourable lady who raises an important point, and I know the House is grateful for the work she does on this important issue. She highlights those new NICE guidelines, which I think are an important step forward. We continue to work with NHS England on how to most effectively ensure that those patients with ME get the early diagnosis and get the treatment they need. And I, or I should say the relevant policy minister, I'm sure will be happy to meet with her to discuss progress, but also her and the APPG's thoughts and ideas in this space.
Mr. Byrne.
The minister is right in what he says over and over again. I remember a few years ago, my close relative had liver cancer, went to see the consultant, and you actually given 1 in 3 chance of survival, but managed to pull through. But at the same time, there was an announcement of another government plan for the NHS. And I said, what about this? And he said, well, we just ignore them because they change them again a few years later. What we actually do is get on and do best practice now, which I think what the minister is saying is happening at the moment. I think what the government could do in this plan is to cut red tape in the NHS, and maybe that would speed up the construction of the hospital in Kettering that we need and is so welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to my honourable friend, not only for his well-timed plug for his local hospital in Kettering, but he does make an important point. The NHS and indeed the government have been getting on with improving things, bringing service levels or trying to bring service levels back to pre-pandemic levels. But I do think there is an importance, notwithstanding his comments about plans more broadly, in us having a clear long-term strategic approach to this, because the sums of money involved are very significant. The waiting list and the impact on those on it is significant. It's right we ensure that we have a clear plan and clear metrics that show how that public money is going to deliver the outcomes that we all want to see delivered for it and that those patients want to see.
Catherine Smith.
Mr. Speaker. Waiting lists for joint replacements are at a record high. I've been contacted by dozens of constituents who are waiting with arthritis and in a lot of pain. So what can the minister say specifically on joint replacements to the over 600,000 people who are waiting nationally now for joint replacements? And can he say whether or not he's met with Versus Arthritis about this issue?
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable lady. She makes an important point. And orthopaedic surgery, for want of a better way of putting it, is a hugely important part of the planned care, planned surgery the NHS does. And while it may not, in the same way as oncology, always directly impact on someone's life chances, it certainly impacts on their quality of life and their ability to enjoy their quality of life. I hope I can give us some good news that I believe I'm due to meet with Versus Arthritis. I've spoken to them in the past. I'm due to meet with them later this week, in fact, to discuss their work in this space and their ideas on how we can incorporate that in our work.
Kearns.
1 in 9 people in England are on a waiting list, and clearly this is too high. And I take confidence from my honourable friend's statement and from the constructive tone in which he is responding. But that figure in Wales is 1 in 5. So does my right honourable friend share my disappointment and dismay about the tone that has been taken from the front bench opposite in particular, when the waiting times in Wales are much longer and the number of people waiting are much longer too?
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend. He makes an important point, and it's a point made by my honourable friend earlier, and of course, I'm sure that the Shadow Secretary of State will be asking his colleague in the Welsh Government where their plan is.
Madeira Wilson.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister will be aware of the shocking 77% rise in the number of children needing specialist mental health care for suicidal thoughts and self-harm between 2019 and 2021. Head teachers in my constituency cite this as a #1 issue, but their staff simply cannot cope with the numbers and the severity of need, and parents are beside themselves as their children in crises are waiting sometimes a year to access treatment. So as it's Children's Mental Health Week, I wonder if the Minister will make a commitment to children, young people and their parents up and down the country that children's mental health will be an urgent priority alongside all the urgent operations that need to be done.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady, and I know she has, since her time, since she was elected to this House, a long track record of an interest and campaigning on this particular issue. She's absolutely right to raise the issue of children's mental health. Before I was a minister, I took a close interest in eating disorders and worked with Beat the Eating Disorders charity. That's an element of this, and the challenges that parents faced in getting access to CAMS, both the first consultation and then the treatment required. So I can absolutely give her the reassurance that mental health, including children's mental health, remains a priority for this government.
Henry Smith.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I very much welcome the record high levels of funding that this government is putting into the National Health Service, and also the rolling out of those rapid diagnostic centres across the country. In that, can I seek an assurance from the Minister that the diagnosis and the treatment of blood cancers will be very much a key element of that?
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and I can give him that reassurance. Quite rightly, the clinical decision-making will inform the approach we adopt to diagnosing and treating cancers, as he would expect. But he's absolutely right in that context. We cannot, nor will we, neglect blood cancer in that context.
Pascal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The elective recovery fund had perverse thresholds written within it. So those hospitals really struggling and battling with the pandemic were the very ones which didn't get any money. Will he ensure within his plan there is a fair distribution of funding so that hospitals like mine in York, which still are battling with very high levels of COVID, get the resources they need?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady, and I'm happy to reassure her that our approach and NHS England improvement approach is designed to ensure that all hospital trusts can make progress, hopefully rapid progress, in tackling their waiting list and get the resources they need to do that.
Jacob Young.
Mr. Speaker, a key way we can get more money directed towards the frontline services and elective care will be by fixing Labour's disastrous PFI deals. Will he meet with me and the South Seas NHS Trust to look at how we can fix Labour's PFI debt at hospitals like James Cook?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to my honourable friend. He's right to draw attention to the huge financial challenges that have that trusts have been saddled with following Labour's PFI deals, and I'm of course delighted to agree to meet with him to see what we can do to try and untangle the worst of them.
Jim Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the right honourable member for his answers, and he also understands the need to do better, but he also wants to improve, and that's reflected in the answers that the right honourable gentleman has given us so far. Will the right honourable member outline what discussions have taken place to bring the devolved assemblies along with government here to prevent healthcare being a postcode lottery in the UK? And does the right honourable member acknowledge the fact that waiting lists for appointments which worsened by the COVID crisis were also poor beforehand, and therefore there's a need for all regions to work together to address this issue, recovery together? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for his question. Yeah, I'm being open and honest at this dispatch box about the scale of the challenge and the challenge it poses to us to tackle it. And he's absolutely right to highlight that. In respect to the devolved administrations, I regularly speak to, I'd like to meet in person, but we regularly meet remotely with the Northern Ireland Health Minister, as well as Robin Swan. And I pay tribute to the work he's doing in this space. We talk about a range of issues, not just waiting lists and the impact of COVID, but he's absolutely right. And I'm always happy to have conversations with my opposite numbers in the devolved administrations.
Tom Hunt.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the fact that 2 million people have been added to a waiting list throughout the pandemic. I think it's foolish to try and pretend that hasn't made a big difference. And I also appreciate the government's £12 billion a year plan to help address this. But needless to say, that many of our constituents continue to wait in pain for elective surgery, and that includes hip and knee replacement. The Minister will know my views about orthopaedic services in Ipswich and some of the concerns I've had about the new centre in Colchester. It could be, though, the increased capacity in Colchester cuts waiting times, but there's still an issue about getting to Colchester for that surgery to take place. Will the Minister meet with me to provide me with an update about how he's ensuring that Ipswich people are at the heart of all future developments when it comes to the Hospitals Trust?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm always happy to agree to meet with my honourable friend. I think following his election in 2019 in a fantastic result in Ipswich, he was one of the first new colleagues I was able to visit to see Ipswich Hospital with him for myself. He makes a very important point. It's important that in looking at the healthcare system in Ipswich and Colchester, we ensure that the people of both Ipswich and Colchester get access to the best possible facilities, and I know that's exactly what he's campaigning for.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks to the Minister for the work he and his department are doing to support our NHS. Can he confirm that the 100 new community diagnostic hubs will speed up referrals processes, particularly in coastal communities with historically poorer health outcomes, ensuring that residents receive diagnoses and treatment swiftly?
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend. She's exactly right in what she says, and the whole purpose of these community diagnostic hubs is to bring cutting-edge diagnostic facilities to the heart of our towns, our rural communities, our seaside communities and our cities to make it much easier for people to access the diagnostic tests they need.
Duncan Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Cromer Hospital is the jewel in the crown of our hospital facilities in North Norfolk. But as my honourable friend will know, it is 25 miles from the nearest main hospital in Norfolk and Norwich, and I have many, many older residents. Would my honourable friend meet with me to discuss the viability of an urgent treatment centre? Not only would it be a huge benefit to my demographic, but also it would go hand in hand with tackling the elective backlog.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While always cautious to caveat any answer with subject to funding available and Her Majesty's Treasury, I'm always happy to meet with honourable and right honourable members to discuss their ideas in respect of their local communities and the services those communities they need, because of course it's honourable and right honourable members who know their communities best.
Ruth Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I draw the Minister's attention to an exciting new proposal for a model surgical hub in the East Midlands, which would tackle the backlog by focusing solely on elective surgery. The plan's been developed by surgeons in Derbyshire, Nottinghamshire and Leicestershire, including my constituent, Dr. Tony Westbrook. Would the Minister join me in welcoming this innovative plan, in thanking everybody involved in drawing it up, and in calling on regional health authorities to give it serious consideration?
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend. She makes a very important point, and what we have seen throughout this pandemic, and we continue to see now as we look to tackle the waiting list, is our people across the health and care system innovating, coming up with exciting new ideas, new ways to achieve the outcomes that we desire. I'll certainly look into the specifics she talks about, and I would certainly congratulate all those involved on their willingness to innovate and come up with new ways of doing things.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome today's statement? But really, I want to take this as an opportunity to thank all those healthcare workers who have worked on the front line throughout the pandemic, but particularly nurses who have worked so hard to keep the services operating. I'm therefore reassured to see that we have seen a 21% increase in nursing applications in just the last year alone. Will my honourable friend confirm, one, that will help us meet our manifesto commitment to recruit 50,000 extra nurses, but more importantly, it will help make their lives easier by reducing their workload somewhat?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right on a number of counts. First of all, to pay tribute to the work of nurses up and down the country during this pandemic. He's also right to highlight the significant progress we've made on the trajectory to meeting our 50,000 nurses manifesto commitment. And the reason we made that commitment is exactly as he says, because we know we need more nurses in NHS, we are committed to recruiting them, and that of course will have a positive impact on all those already in our NHS. They are joined by many newly qualified professionals to help share that load with them.
Stephen Metcalfe. Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Blackpool was one of the first areas to receive additional funding to tackle the NHS COVID backlog, and this funding is already making a difference on the ground for my constituents. When further monies are allocated, will the Minister commit to prioritising those areas such as Blackpool, which have some of the worst health outcomes in the entire country?
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend. He is a strong champion and a strong local voice for Blackpool in this House. We are clear in this government that in the investment decisions we make, we are committed to making sure that we level up across this country and that money goes to where it can make the greatest difference in terms of improving outcomes for all patients and all of those who use our NHS.
That completes that UQ. We're going to come to the next and let people leave who wish to leave. Yes. Right, we now come to urgent question from the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, Angela Rayner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Minister for the Cabinet Office to make a statement on his appointment as the Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister and associated machinery of government changes.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And before I begin, I am glad to have this opportunity to offer my congratulations to Her Majesty the Queen on reaching the 70th anniversary of her accession. She's a hero to me and millions of others, and I know the House will join me in wishing her many more years. Now, Mr. Speaker, in a statement to this House last week, the Prime Minister pledged to make changes. Changes in the way Downing Street and the Cabinet Office are managed so that we can get on with the job that this government was elected to do. And that is what the Prime Minister is in the course of doing. As the Prime Minister has said, we need to continue our recovery from the pandemic. We need to help hundreds of thousands more people into work. We need to deliver on our ambitious agenda to level up the entire country, improving people's opportunities regardless of where they're from. And the changes that the Prime Minister made to his senior team over the course of the weekend will bring renewed discipline and focus to his programme of priorities and deliver them faster for the people of the United Kingdom. In his statement to the House last week, the Prime Minister accepted, Mr. Speaker, in full the general findings of the Cabinet Office's second Permanent Secretary, Sue Gray, in her investigation into alleged gatherings on government premises, COVID restrictions. The Prime Minister offered a sincere apology, and he also accepted Sue Gray's recommendation that we must, quote, learn from these events and act now. In response, then, Mr. Speaker, the House will be aware that the Prime Minister has asked my right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, to provide political leadership within Number 10 as his Chief of Staff. As the government has set out, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster will be in charge of further integrating the new Office of the Prime Minister and the Cabinet Office to make operations at the heart of government more efficient and effective, and ensuring that the government agenda is better aligned with the Cabinet and backbenchers. He will be working very closely with the Cabinet Secretary on the new structure. Now, my right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, will also work directly with his Cabinet colleagues to ensure that levelling up is a priority for all departments and delivered at a rapid pace that brings about tangible improvements in the day-to-day lives of the people of this country. Mr. Speaker, for the avoidance of any doubt, I would like to make it clear to the House that in undertaking this role, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster has been given additional responsibilities. He remains a member of the Cabinet and is not a special advisor. The Prime Minister is expanding on the already cross-cutting role of the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster and giving the Chief of Staff enhanced ministerial authority to promote levelling up, whilst also playing a senior coordinating role in Number 10 under the direction of the Prime Minister. Now, Mr. Speaker, there are wider benefits to this new approach. It will significantly strengthen Cabinet government, meaning an enhanced role for both ministers and Parliament itself. This is a Chief of Staff who will himself answer to the electorate and who therefore has the democratic authority to direct civil servants and special advisers as a Minister of the Crown, something an unelected advisor cannot do. Finally, Mr. Speaker, the government set out that there would continue to be further appointments over the coming days with a particular focus on engagement and liaison.
I'm not sure whether the Minister aware this is a UQ, not a statement. And 3 minutes is only allowed for a statement. You're now on 4, so I'm sure that you're coming to the end. Minister.
Speaker. Just on my last sentence, I was saying that that the government set out that there would continue to be further appointments over the coming days, with a particular focus on improving engagement and liaison with Parliament. Full ministerial responsibilities will be announced in due course.
Angela Rayner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I share with the Minister's comments regarding the Queen, and it's always nice to be at the dispatch box against the Minister, but quite honestly, where is the Chief of Staff? And the Minister mentions what the Prime Minister said. He also said that this change gives an enhanced role for Parliament. Yet his very first act, Mr. Speaker, is refusing to even turn up here to explain his own job. But maybe the Paymaster General can tell us, is it a ministerial job, a public appointment, a party role? It's not a SPAD, or is it something that doesn't even exist yet? Apparently, he won't get a salary, Mr. Speaker. Perhaps he should join a trade union. But will he appoint or manage advisors or officials? How will he relate to the permanent secretary? Who will appoint staff, as the Minister mentioned, to the new office of the Prime Minister? And when will the office be set up? And on what budget? Or has the Chancellor given him a blank cheque? Is it a separate department, Mr. Speaker, to the Cabinet Office? Or are they to merge? How will he answer to us? Will he face me here as the Chief of Staff or as a Minister for number 10? Is he still in charge of dealing with the Channel crossing, tackling the pandemic, protecting the union, veterans policy, and every other priority of the Cabinet Office? Mr. Speaker, this government is in chaos and the country is paying the price.
Well, it's always a pleasure to appear shadowing, if I may put it that way, the Honourable Lady, but she will know that the Chief of Staff role was created, actually, by Tony Blair in response to Labour figures like Jonathan Powell and Alistair Campbell, who had, of course, huge powers in the Blair years to direct civil servants, and they were unelected. They were unelected. The Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster is answerable to this House and will present a full range of responsibilities to this House in due course.
Sir William Cash.
Mr. Speaker, would my right honourable friend agree that nobody is better qualified to be both Chief of Staff and Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster and Minister for the Cabinet Office, given that the Chancellor has the widest possible extensive departmental responsibility already for the Treasury, for health, for financial services, and for Brexit, and has a comprehensive knowledge and capacity both to understand and to have the necessary authority and structure to carry out the new functions allocated to him.
My right honourable friend is absolutely right, as usual. One could hardly have a more qualified person to be Chief of Staff, a former Secretary of State, answerable to this House, and now someone who is Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, an elected person answerable to this House as well as to the electorate.
SNP spokesperson Brendan O'Hara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm sorry that he's not in his place, because I wanted to congratulate and welcome the country's newest senior civil servant to his post. And I don't quite know how someone who already has 2 full-time jobs is going to salvage Downing Street's reputation, when the Prime Minister has often claimed that they all broke lockdown rules and get regularly tanked up in Downing Street because of the immense workload and the pressure of the job. But there is something far more serious here. Erskine May, section on public service disqualification, Chapter 3, paragraph 12. It says, all persons employed either in whole or in part in the civil servants are disqualified, and it is immaterial whether they're serving in an established capacity. It's clear as day, Minister, that he is the new Chief of Staff at Downing Street, and he is also a serving member of this House. He cannot do both. According to Erskine May, he has disqualified himself from that role. So when will the government be moving the writ for the by-election?
Well, I had no idea, Mr. Speaker, that the honourable gentleman presented himself as an expert in Erskine May. But I have to say, I don't think, with respect, many others would. The reality of the matter is he's not a civil servant. He remains a servant of this House, a servant of the people of this country, democratically elected and highly accountable.
So Desmond swear.
On the whole, Mr. Speaker, governments don't do things well. So will he persuade the new Chief of Staff to concentrate the government's efforts on doing fewer things a bit better?
Yes. Well, of course, Mr. Speaker, as the House will recognise, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster has a long history of ministerial service in this House, which he has performed par excellence. And I have no doubt, and I know that my colleagues will have no doubt, that he will continue to perform his functions, whether they be in number 10 Downing Street or elsewhere, with excellence.
And Bradshaw.
But, Mr. Speaker, being Chief of Staff to any Prime Minister is more than a full-time job.
Yeah.
To this Prime Minister, from everything we know about him, it's an impossible one. Just look at the collateral damage of those who've fallen by the wayside, having come into close proximity to this Prime Minister. So how will for North East Cambridgeshire do all of these jobs and serve his constituents?
Well, in the same way, if I may suggest, that the Shadow Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster is also the Shadow Minister for the Cabinet Office, Shadow Secretary of State for the Future of Work, Shadow First Secretary of State, Deputy Leader of the Opposition, Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, and Member of Parliament for Ashton-under-Lyne. A highly accomplished appointment for that reason.
Alan Penn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The appointments announced over the weekend are significant figures, but it's inevitable within any restructuring of an office, particularly like number 10 Downing Street, that there will be disruption that ensues. What reassurance can my right honourable friend provide that that has been taken into account and that their sole focus and freedom will be on delivering for the government?
Well, my right honourable friend is quite right to raise this point, and I can assure him that the entire focus of the Prime Minister and the government is to deliver on the elected promises, the manifesto promises that resulted, of course, in the biggest Conservative victory that we have seen in this country since the 1980s. We are delivering on those, we have been, and we will continue to do so.
Cat Smith. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As perhaps one of the most prolific members of this House asking questions to the Cabinet Office, it must be noted that it is a department that has incredibly slow replies to written questions, incredibly slow replies to letters. So can I ask the Paymaster General whether or not he thinks that this change will make responses from the Cabinet Office faster or slower, given that the Minister responsible now has even more responsibilities? Was being Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster just not enough?
Well, to be fair, I think I am responsible for answering parliamentary questions. And actually, I think I'm right in saying that the statistics have dramatically improved over the last 4.5 months.
Peter Bone.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I certainly welcome the fact that unelected should be replaced by members of Parliament and government. One of the problems we've had over recent years is the fact there's been a drift away from government and Parliament. They've been going in the opposite direction. Having members of Parliament in there will improve things. But had this, Madam Deputy Chairman, been in post a while ago, would the Minister agree with me it would have been great fun to have Dominic Cummings at the dispatch box to answer questions?
Well, I'm not actually going to agree with my honourable friend on that point, if he'll forgive me, but I do agree with him on the main substance of his point, which is he's hit the nail on the head, Madam Deputy Speaker, in that it is that accountability, that transparency, that link with the backbenchers of this House that's absolutely going to be delivered thanks to this appointment.
Ms. Bryant.
It's a bit difficult, isn't it, to argue that there's going to be greater accountability when the man's not even here to be accountable at the first hurdle. I mean, it's a preposterous appointment. It's a sow's ear of an appointment. It confuses the various different aspects of government. It makes it far more difficult, actually, for us to hold him to account. And doesn't anybody in Downing Street yet realise that the problem is the lack of control? It's the unaccountability. And it's the fibs, isn't it?
Well, I don't know what he means. What I do know is that it's this government that is delivering on the manifesto promises that, as I have said. What he must recognise is that there is increased transparency, increased accountability by the fact that an elected member of parliament answerable to this House is now going to be Chief of Staff at number 10.
Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now then, we're making changes at number 10, and still that lot over there keep moaning and whining. So does the Minister agree with me that if they want to have a say in who works at number 10, then they should do something they've not done for 20 years, and that's win a general election?
He is absolutely right.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My constituents are rightly concerned to see the Prime Minister pursue a departmental merger, the cost of which is likely to surpass £10 million in taxpayers' money at a time when we're facing a cost of living crisis. It's well documented that number 10 is used for living and working with porous boundaries, and we're also all aware of the Prime Minister's well-documented frustrations with his flat. So can the Minister rule out that any public money will be spent on any additional refurbishment of the Downing Street flat in the context of this merger?
I don't think the Downing Street flat has the smallest thing to do with this matter. What is, of course, and has always been the case, is that the number 10 Downing Street operation is an integral part of the Cabinet Office. They have already been interconnected, both physically, metaphorically, literally, and in any other way. And what this does is recognise that and create a new avenue of increased democratic accountability by having a Chief of Staff at number 10 who, for the first time, can come to this House and speak from this dispatch box.
Richard Drax.
Yes, I'm sure moving bums on seats will work, and I'm confident this one will. I'm sure also that my right honourable friend will agree with me that we will now have a stream of balloon narrative Conservative policies that will burst out of number 10.
Well, let's hope so.
We have had and we will continue to have more.
Clive Everett.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I think we should remind ourselves why we're in this predicament, or why the government is in this predicament. It's because the Prime Minister made a slur against the Leader of the Opposition at a statement last Monday, which accused him of failing to prosecute Jimmy Savile, something that the victims of Jimmy Savile have said has no basis in truth and should be withdrawn. So what is it about the government that thinks it knows better than the victims of Jimmy Savile, and isn't that the reason why they can't find anyone decent to fill these roles?
The two things are completely unconnected, he's wrong to characterise this appointment in the way that he does. This appointment is one that must be recognised by all and sundry as of someone who has served this House and served the government in a ministerial capacity for many years and could hardly be more experienced. He will present the House with that accountability and transparency and quality of administration that the House would expect.
Madam Deputy Speaker, last week the Prime Minister promised change at the top, and we are seeing this swiftly delivered. I welcome this appointment and indeed the creation of the office of the Prime Minister. But does my right honourable friend agree that as Conservatives our longer term ambition should be to reduce the cost of a civil service to the taxpayer?
Well, yes, and the fact that there will be no extra salary that the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster is accepting will, of course, reduce costs accordingly. He's quite right.
Marcia de Cordova.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And it is a real shame that the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster couldn't actually to the dispatch box this afternoon. So can the Paymaster tell us if the new Chief of Staff will manage the new Communications Director, and just what that job status is? Government sources have denied this morning that he could return to his lobbying firm, Hawthorne Advisors, if his number 10 role, for some reason, who knows, doesn't last that long. So will the Minister categorically state that that will not happen in any circumstances?
Yes or no?
No. It's very peculiar to ask me from the dispatch box to predict the future, but if I was asked to predict the future, it certainly wouldn't have Labour in it.
James
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Having worked with the new Chief of Staff as Secretary of State and also seen his work as Chief Secretary of the Treasury, can I urge the Minister to ask the new Chief of Staff to use this as an opportunity? Sometimes fewer people in number 10 can operate better than a large number, and this is an opportunity to have efficiencies across those two areas.
I entirely agree with him, and of course he knows that quality is often better than quantity, and that is what we have with the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster and the role that he'll be performing.
Patrick Grady.
Deputy Speaker, can he give us an example of a decision that the Chief of Staff will take in that new capacity that is different from a decision he might have taken as Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster or Cabinet Office Minister, for which he will be accountable and answerable to this House for?
I have no doubt that he will be making a myriad range of decisions on a daily basis, and he will have to wait and see what they are. But what they will be ones that deliver for the people of this country, unlike his party.
Alexander Stafford.
Deputy Speaker, I've been listening very intently to this UQ, but I'm still confused about what the opposition is actually asking. As far as I'm aware, this new appointment is what the Grey Report actually wanted, and it's the Prime Minister actually carrying out the Grey Report. Is the opposition actually saying we shouldn't listen to the Grey Report?
Well, he is right. He's right to refer to the Grey Report, because the reality of the matter is that whereas one of the points raised was about the quote-unquote fragmentary nature of arrangements, well, this is addressing that problem direct. I'm very surprised to see that the party opposite isn't welcoming it with open arms.
Toby Perkins.
Madam Deputy Speaker, this is absolutely the end of days. My right honourable friend from Ashton-under-Lyne has asked very specific questions to the Paymaster General, which he's been unable to answer. The reality is someone's been appointed to a job that they haven't yet decided what the responsibilities are. So will the Paymaster General ensure that once they've actually understood what the Right Honourable Gentleman from North East Cambridge is going to be doing, that he will come to this place, answer the questions that my right honourable friend has reasonably asked, so that we can actually hold him to account, because this government is an absolute shambles.
Well, I will resist the temptation to say that that is rich coming from the honourable gentleman. He would know precisely, and his party would precisely know what a shambles is, and they prove that every day of the week. But I will say to the honourable gentleman, to answer his question, yes, he will hear from the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster in due course, and he will be presentable and answerable to this House, unlike chiefs of staff that have gone heretofore. That is the fact of this appointment, and it's one that he can't answer.
Paul McCartney.
Speaker, my right honourable friend and myself are both very pleased with the new appointment of the Chief of Staff, and I wondered if the Paymaster General might watch West Wing and would like with me to pick out the best traits of either Leo McGarry or Josh Lyman that our colleague in his new position has.
Well, I would like to know what part I could play in such a role. But I would say to him that we do have, and we will have, in our Chief of Staff. I didn't hear that, Madam Deputy Speaker, but what I will say is we will have in the Chief of Staff who's just been appointed someone who will be accountable and responsible to the British people.
Jonathan Edwards.
Madam Deputy Speaker. It seems the Welsh Government were not forewarned of the Chancellor's intention to introduce a council tax rebate during his statement last Thursday on energy prices, despite this being clearly a devolved policy area. This means no policy has been announced in Wales, leaving many of my constituents who are already concerned in a state of confusion. Will the new office of the Prime Minister prioritise better intergovernmental relations so that Wales and Scotland are not blindsided by the British government's policy announcements?
Every department of government, without exception, does everything it can do to support the union of this country.
I must confirm that I'm more interested about having a debate about delivering and the role the Chief of Staff will play delivering the priorities for my constituents and less about process. I'd also say that a criticism of number 10 is that it can be overly metropolitan in its focus and Westminster bubble orientated. So just my record from it's actually an advantage having a member of Parliament, especially an engaged one, from the Fens no less. And as a Fen boy, I can confirm there's no less metropolitan place than the Fens, and there could be an advantage in that.
I have no doubt my honourable friend is absolutely right.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I asked a question of the Duchy of Lancaster in this chamber recently about the failure of the civil service fast-track system in terms of recruiting black members of staff. So can the Paymaster General give assurances that he will be able to continue progressing this most serious issue in his new role? Thank you.
Well, she's quite right to ask that question. It is a very important matter and it continues to be, and I can give her that assurance.
Jacob Young.
Madam Deputy Speaker, in November, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster was drafted in to help solve the illegal crossings crisis in the Channel. Can my right honourable friend assure me that solving this issue remains front and centre of this government's mission?
I can indeed, and I know that my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, continues to work on that as well.
Owen Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. So we've now got a SPAD who's not a SPAD, so we've got a special status that's been created. I just wanted to ask the Paymaster General, will this be the only situation we have such a special status appointment made?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I don't see this as a special status. This is a Minister of the Crown who remains Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, who now has the role of Chief of Staff at number 10. It's a highly democratic, highly accountable position. In fact, more so than any of those that have gone before. He should welcome it if he was interested in democracy.
Last question, Justin Matters.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. How many of the staff departures from Downing Street in the last few days are as a direct result of the Sue Gray's report? And have there been any associated findings of culpability against individuals for the failings set out in that report?
It is not good practice to discuss staffing and human resources matters on the floor of the House. He knows that the government is doing what it needs to do in response to the challenges that it finds itself.
Point of order, Martin Doherty-Hughes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last Monday, I had the immense privilege in my home constituency in assisting to hoist the Holocaust Memorial flag to commemorate everyone who was butchered, who was medically experimented on by National Socialism as it dominated the continent of Europe. So as the co-chair of the all-party parliamentary group on the Gypsy travel in Roma, I was utterly dumbfounded at the weekend when the Holocaust